And good afternoon, I'm Chief Meteorologist Chris Franklin with an eye on the tropics. Now, we are still closely watching an unorganized area down in the Caribbean, which does make our forecast a little trickier, but more frustrating than anything because folks want to know where this is going to go. And perhaps the models may be telling us, maybe having a little bit better of an idea of where this may be going, not with regards to how the storm structure is, but the surrounding environment and the steering currents as we head into next week. So let's start with a wide look at what's going on in the Atlantic. And while there are a number of areas highlighted, keep in mind we only have currently two named storms. That would be Gaston, which is going to remain out near the Azores into the open North Atlantic, and Fiona, which is getting closer to Bermuda. Now, the center of the storm will stay to the west of the island, but it's still going to impact them with hurricane force winds, heavy rainfall, the higher surf, higher seas. What's going to be fascinating, though, with Fiona is that it'll still be a powerful storm, probably transitioning into an extratropical or post-tropical storm, but winds likely still in excess of 100 miles an hour as it moves up toward Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. So the Canadian Maritimes are going to get pounded by a very powerful storm as Fiona continues moving northward. Obviously, we know where our two named storms are going to go, so let's try and figure out where our unnamed storm is going to go. Still just an area of investigation, highlighted at a high % chance of eventually developing, though we have not yet seen that. And one of the reasons for that is where it is in the Caribbean. One, it's pretty close to land. Here's the coast of Venezuela, and the area of investigation very close to being near land. So that does usually hinder some development with a little bit of land friction. In other words, that wind is not able to really wrap around. It's also in an area of very dry air across the Caribbean, and we still have some strong wind shear, all helping to keep this a fairly weak and unorganized system, which does make it a little bit more difficult for the computer models to forecast it. Looking at satellite, boy, are you able to even find anything? If you kind of look at some of the lower clouds here, and I'll try and pick those out for you, we're looking at here is kind of a broad circulation. We do have a satellite that actually runs these scans across the globe, and we're able to get an estimate of winds. Early this morning, the scans were showing that there was somewhat of an elongated but a fairly closed off circulation. Whether or not the winds near that circulation would be supportive of a tropical system or not, it doesn't appear so, but it does look like maybe there is some organization being attempted near the surface. Now, when the hurricane hunters flew into this area yesterday, there was no sign of that, so maybe we're starting to see some signs of that now. However, wind shear and dry air certainly seem to still be playing more of a role in keeping this unorganized, which does make forecasting it a little bit more, in terms of accuracy, very low. Now, this is what the computer models are still saying. Now, again, when we show you the spaghetti plot, this is not an intensity model. It's just showing where that maybe broad center, more organized center will continue to go. And there still remains fairly decent confidence in the models and decent agreement into about Saturday of it moving generally northwest and then maybe a little bit more west due to the upper steering to the north. Again, this is not showing it necessarily as a named storm or still just kind of an open wave, but where it should be trending. Now, as we head toward the end of the week and into the end of the weekend and start of next week, that's where we do get a little bit more spread from the models, anywhere from the Yucatan to well into western Cuba. However, we look for this kind of consensus, and note, a lot of the models are now indicating more the western tip of Cuba. If you were watching our detailed forecast yesterday, we were talking about the split between the Euro and the GFS. The GFS was far more west, more over the Yucatan. As a matter of fact, it was even farther west than these models and more over the central Yucatan, and reaching more of the southern to then central Gulf of Mexico before any kind of a turn toward the east or northeast. Now the model consensus, including the GFS, which I'll show you in a moment, are becoming a little bit more aligned with what the Euro was saying, even as of yesterday and even 2 days ago, that this would be more toward the eastern part of the Yucatan Channel between the Yucatan and Cuba, or right over the western tip of Cuba. If it enters the Gulf in that position, it does look more likely to get pulled northward quicker in this east coast trough that we're going to see, helping to draw the storm northward. So there is a little bit more of a consensus with the models. Now, I say that hesitantly because there, again, is still no organized storm to forecast, which does make the accuracy of the models fairly low. But we do like to see a little bit of a trend, and a trend that does favor southeast Louisiana and southern Mississippi, and in fact much of the northern Gulf Coast. Note that we do start to see more of a turn. A few of the models kind of end the storm here. Not all of them go out beyond 7 days or so, but we do start to see more of a turn into central Florida, maybe around the Tampa area as we head toward the middle to end of next week. So why the turn? Well, it looks like maybe the GFS is starting to come a little bit more in line with the Euro. We have tended to see that. The Euro tends to pick up on these outside features, these steering currents, faster than the GFS, and the GFS usually has a couple of days in order to, or needs a couple of days to kind of catch up, and maybe that's what we're seeing. Remember, here is kind of the rough position of where what is still 98. I'm not going to start calling it Hermine because it is not there yet, but this may be about where the center of it will be on Tuesday early morning. Remember, yesterday it was right about here in the central Yucatan, so it is starting to trend more in the direction of the Euro eastward. The upper high over Cuba, not quite as strong as it was showing yesterday. And as we put this into motion, it is now picking up on, and I'm going to move the map here a little bit so you can see this better. It is starting to pick up on this deeper East Coast trough, which as of yesterday really wasn't doing it all that much. So now while the the GFS does place a little bit more, say, the East Central Gulf, it is not as far west as it was yesterday, and certainly not nearly as close to coming near the mouth of the river as it was yesterday. So as we continue the motion of that, continuing to get drawn northward, the GFS would have maybe a stronger high with the influence of this upper trough, pulling it into the panhandle of Florida. Let's see what happens over the next couple of days. The Euro remains fairly steady. Now, it is a little bit even farther and more dramatically east. About here would be the center of what could become Hermine, 98 right now, and more in west central Cuba, moving its way toward the Keys, because again, this high is a little bit farther to the east. This upper trough is even deeper, meaning what would be pulling the storm northward. And then as we put this into motion, quickly moving into South Florida, and around the same time, Wednesday, so less than a week away, the Euro already has the center of the storm out in the open Atlantic, and then quickly getting pushed off toward the north, associated with the upper troughing. So the Euro still is indicating more of an extreme eastward envelope of the entire forecast cone. There is no cone yet, but if we were to start drawing one, it would be from the Yucatan maybe toward almost central Cuba. The Euro has been trending a little bit more east, while the GFS had been more extreme west. It is starting to push a bit more to the east as well. Euro is a little bit more east than it was yesterday, but still keeping it along that same path, and really has been indicating more of a Florida peninsula storm as opposed to the panhandle of Florida, and certainly nowhere near the northern Gulf Coast. What's interesting, if we just look back at history, this is a look at all storms in the Gulf between September 28th to November 30th. So from next Wednesday, because we're not expecting a landfall until around Wednesday, if it is more extreme Florida. So we're looking at kind of from next Wednesday to November. This is a look back at history. And I told the computer to take a look at all storms from that time frame within 50 miles of New Orleans. And this is what it found. It found one Cat 1, no Category 2s, one Category 3, and 3 Category 4. So we do have a history of seeing storms that kind of make this turn and affect southeast Louisiana kind of late in the season. But then I told the computer, all right, well, let's take a look at maybe Tampa. I could also do Miami or anywhere else, and look at the number of storms in that same time frame, but now focused over Tampa. You have 5 Category 1 storms, 7 Category 2s, 2 Category 3s, 9 Category 4s, and 3 Category 5s. I show you this just because based on history, this time of the year, we usually get the upper troughs and cold fronts that usually deflect these storms more toward the eastern Gulf and more toward Florida. And it looks like that may be what happens. If the upper steering is well forecasted based on the Euro of the last couple of days and where the GFS may be starting to pick up on this deep upper trough that's going to push a cold front through on Monday for us, actually bringing a gorgeous week next week. We'll kind of get a reinforcement. It'll deepen even further. It'll keep and strengthen that front in the Gulf, that should be our shield to keep this system away from us. So the Euro has been the more consistent forecast, whereas the GFS has been kind of changing back and forth. However, we have, at least as of today, started to see the GF trending more to the east. I like the trends of the models right now. With that said, we still do not have a named storm, which does make forecasting this very difficult. So my confidence level is still low. My gut feeling is better for us, but my confidence is low. So the scientific reasoning, low. Just the gut feeling I have is a little bit on the higher side, that things have been trending our way based on the forecast. But again, this is still a long-range forecast, and with the tropics, that is a lifetime in forecast accuracy. So there is still a lot that could happen. Keep in mind, it is still not an organized storm. We'll have to see it's able to overcome the dry air and wind shear over it right now. Those things are supposed to subside, and why the expectation is that this will become a named storm. At the moment, we have not really seen that. However, the models are indicating that we will. We will see it moving westward across the Caribbean in the next couple of days, and by Monday, Tuesday, should be entering the southeastern Gulf. The big moment of truth will be exactly where we see this storm enter the Gulf. If it looks like closer to Cuba, I do think we're going to be fine. Even if it is over the Yucatan and more in the central Gulf, while it may get a little bit closer to Louisiana, it still looks like the upper troughing and the front will deflect this away from us. So my confidence is a bit higher in terms of it making a direct impact to Louisiana or Mississippi. The GFS has more of the panhandle of Florida. The Euro has been trending more of the peninsula, and the Euro has been the more consistent model. Not consistency doesn't always equate to accuracy, but I do like that it is more consistent. The models that are going all over the place have very low confidence in their forecast, so they just keep changing as the atmosphere changes. But we are starting to see maybe a little bit more agreement in the models. I would venture to say we're not going to see any more dramatic changes through the next several updates of the models as we go into later tonight and even maybe early tomorrow, until this storm becomes a bit better organized, which again has not yet happened. But stay tuned to WWL-TV, WWL-TV.com, and all of our social media platforms for the very latest. And as always, this is one of those wait and watch type scenarios, which are usually the more frustrating because it's still very much a question mark, but maybe we're starting to get a little bit more confidence in that forecast. But that is still not until about a week out from where we are today.